With Heartstopper, Netflix is really cementing itself as the leader in young queer TV. With series like She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, Elite, Young Royals, Sex Education, and now Heartstopper, Netflix is becoming a beacon of sexually diverse storytelling, and I am here for it all. Hi all, my name is Ryan and welcome to my channel What the Pop, where we discuss pop culture in general, Buffy a lot, and a few things queer. Today we are looking at Netflix Heartstopper, an LGBTQI teen flick based on the webcomic turned graphic novel by Alice Oseman. Now if you haven't seen it or haven't at least read the webcomic, this will contain spoilers, so you have been warned. I'm going to talk a bit about this series because I freaking loved it. I've already binged it twice and I'm pretty much through my third time. But to give you an overall summary, as someone who has read the webcomic and found it adorable, the highest praise I can give this series is that it is an accurate recreation of the comic. While there are some differences, mostly towards the end of the season, this is pretty much just the comic brought to life. You will recognise most of the dialogue. The main characters mostly resemble their comic counterparts, and from what I can remember of the comic, most of the scenes in it are simply translated to the screen. If they've left anything out, it was small and minor. None of the major events are gone. Probably the biggest thing that's missing is that in some panels in the webcomic, you got internal dialogue from a character, and some of that is now missing. Now, if you've read the webcomic, the first season on Netflix basically covers up till Charlie and Nick go to the beach and the events straight after that, essentially up to the end of chapter 3. Now the reason we have a very faithful recreation of the webcomic is because Alice Oseman was heavily involved in this Netflix production. She wrote the script and oversaw things such as costuming and casting. As such, we have characters that are, for the most part, very close to their comics versions. Main characters, Charlie and Nick, played by Joe Locke and Kit Connor, look like they've been lifted straight from the page. And even more so than Young Royals, this is a cast of actual teenagers. So for many of them, this is their acting debut. The general premise of this story is that Nick is a charming rugby-playing jock who meets sensitive out student Charlie when they are seated together in form room. For the Americans who are unaware, form is basically homeroom, an admin period at the start of the day where attendance is taken, announcements are made, etc. They get on well. Charlie develops a crush and Nick finds himself unexpectedly falling for Charlie too. It's the story of them chastely flirting in a very awkward British rom-com way. Think basically anything with Hugh Grant in it. And all while developing feelings for each other, revealing those feelings to each other, exploring those feelings with each other, and ultimately telling other people about those feelings. Joe Locke here is so well cast as Charlie. He reminds me of a cross between Joshua Bassett from High School Musical, the series, and Colin Morgan, who played Merlin in the Merlin TV show. He perfectly captures Charlie's vulnerability combined with the quiet strength of someone who has endured the process of a forced coming out and the incessant bullying that followed, and has had to become more resilient because of it. He has self-esteem issues and often sees himself as worthless and a burden to the people in his life. And Charlie is so sweet and so kind that combined with that innocence and vulnerability, you just want to protect him. So it's no real surprise that Nick wants to. Kit Connor as Nick looks exactly how I would have imagined that Nick looks in real life. He has a very classic British schoolboy look to him, and as someone who basically attended a school like this, I think he was great casting. He actually reminds me a little of a young Heath Ledger when he was on Australian TV before he made the jump to Hollywood. Kit previously played a young Elton John in Rocketman, which is where you may recognise him from. And he plays the journey that Nick goes through in the season to perfection. From the perspective of the comic, he is Nick come to life. He couldn't have been better cast. He is a golden retriever made human, which is Nick to a T. In the webcomics that this season covers, the other characters are very much side characters. The focus is solely and squarely on Charlie and Nick. And this series doesn't work if you don't have the perfect Char and the perfect Nick. And a big part of what makes Joe Locke and Kit Connor perfect is the chemistry between them. From the first look, the first hi, to their complete ease with each other, these boys have chemistry and it's freaking adorable. And it's watching that chemistry grow and morph from friends into more that will keep you transfixed to your screen. Their awkward flirting, their first kiss, their second kiss, their down low relationship, Nick defending Charlie from his friends, their date to the beach, their declarations as boyfriends. All of this works because the chemistry between the leads is magnetic. Something as simple as them receiving messages from each other, and the smiles they give makes you truly believe the feelings these boys have for each other. These moments are embellished with animation elements that incorporates the design aesthetic from the comic itself. Leaves blowing by, birds giving wings, electric sparks between hands, and of course fluttering hearts and butterflies give all these moments such a charming and magical flair that it makes even a slight sigh, shy smile, or longing gaze more impactful and meaningful. This is supported by wonderful music choices such as the sweet and ethereal Dance With Me by Biba Doobie, while Nick and Char play in the snow together. In a series whose entire premise is about experiencing those things with these boys, it reminds you of what this story is really about. It's meant to be uplifting, it's so warm and cozy, and it's the TV equivalent of a hug. It's the best way I can describe how you'll feel through most of this. Don't get me wrong, you will cry multiple times. You will ride these emotions with these boys. But this show doesn't dwell and moves at a decent pace, so before you have time to wallow in misery, something will have you grinning with glee. Now, while in the webcomic, the further it goes, other characters get more involved in the story, this part is mostly Charlie and Nick's story. But in the Netflix series, we see the other characters a lot more, and their expanded role is where we see most of the stuff that's not in the comics. Of the supporting cast, my favourite was easily Elle, a trans girl who transferred from Nick and Charlie's school to the corresponding girls' academy, played by trans actor Yasmin Finney, also a newcomer to acting. Her character arc in this is more about making friends in a new school and not wanting to jeopardise her friendship with Tao, even though she has feelings for him. The show eschews the usual trans storylines and instead gives the trans character a storyline with broader appeal. Changing schools, having to make new friends, finding your place, these are things anyone could be dealing with. Tao, played by William Gale, of all the friends is probably the character I like the least. I find him a little bit more acerbic than he was in the comic, and to me it makes him a little bit more off-putting. In a scene that's one of the departures from the webcomic, we see him fight Harry, one of Charlie's bullies, played by Cormac Hyde-Corrin, another newcomer to acting. I use fight in inverted commas because they're just rolling around on top of each other, and I've seen mud wrestling that looks more like an actual fight. This version of Tao is more antagonistic than the comic version, and it just makes him less likeable. His antagonism is necessary though, because it's a result of his opposition to everything changing, which is one of the major themes. And it's also to create more drama that wasn't present in the comics and is necessary for television. Similarly, not wanting things to change is Tara, played by Karina Brown. Tara befriends Elle and becomes a fast trio with her initially secret girlfriend Darcy, played by Kizzy Edgell. Darcy is an out lesbian, and of all the characters is the most confident and secure in who she is. Rounding out the friend group is Isaac, played by Toby Donovan. Isaac is one of the major changes from the comic. He is a new addition and takes the place of Aled from the comic. This was done because Aled is a main character in another of Alice Oseman's graphic novels, so what they can do with him is limited. Isaac is always buried in a book, so he doesn't speak much, but he notices a lot, being the first of the group to really notice Charlie and Nick are together. Speaking of characters from other series, Jenny Walzer plays Tori, Charlie's older sister. Tori is the main character in another Alice Oseman novel called Solitaire. While mostly a loner, she does care and worry about her brother, especially when she notices how he feels about Nick. The other major change is the introduction of Imogen, played by Rhea Norwood, as someone who is also interested in Nick. She was basically added to create more tension and add drama to the story, essentially a minor hurdle between Charlie and Nick that must be overcome. The webcomic often has issues arise and solve fairly easily, so it's necessary to create further drama in a TV series, or else it's kind of flat. As per the webcomic, adults appear in minor roles as teachers, coaches and parents. We see Charlie's father drop him off and pick him up from things and is supportive and protective of his son. Nick's mother, played by the wonderful Olivia Colman, is perfect in her minor role. Across the 8 episodes, she is probably in about 5 minutes of screen time, but they help set up their supportive dynamic, and the scene of him coming out to her at the end of the season had me in tears despite it being fairly low-key. Overall, the casting in the show is outstanding, and all the comic characters are represented well by their on-screen actors. While it would be easy to write off Heartstopper as just another coming out story, it's not really that at all. Heartstopper has 2 main themes. The first is just a fear of change, and change in general, and its impact and role in our development. And the second is identity. While they are different themes, they do affect each other. One often requires change to find and express our true identity. So much of Heartstopper is about identity and what that means, and it's mostly through Nick's journey that we get that perspective and experience. At the start of the series, Nick is a skilled and handsome jock and experiences the ease of social status that accompanies that position. He's popular, one of the cool kids, but he begins to find himself drawn and attracted to this other boy, and he doesn't really understand why, and goes on this journey of self-discovery to try and find the identity that fits him. Because while he initially questions whether he's gay or not, he ultimately realises, while watching Keira Knightley and Orlando Bloom in Pirates of the Caribbean, a sexual awakening for many, that he's attracted to both of them, and that he is bisexual. Now, in my analysis of Sex Education, I talked about how I would like to see Adam come out as bi, because nothing in his story requires him to discard the feelings he's had about the girls in his life prior to Eric, and would help to eliminate the bi-erasure that so often happens with male characters in TV and film. They usually just become gay. Here though, Nick explicitly states that he's bi, and when he does come out to his mum, just like in the comic, he says he's attracted to girls too. His mum says, "You don't have to say that if you don't actually feel that," and he says, "No, I definitely like both." So it's refreshing that they are maintaining his bisexuality in the series. One of the aspects of identity that the show highlights is finding our authentic selves, and sometimes how society and a willingness to fit in cause us to be different people in different circumstances. Sometimes that is realising that the people in your life may not be the best ones for you. After Nick invites Charlie over and they spend the day together, a day that Nick will refer to later on as one of the best days of his life, when Charles is gone, his mother says, "Charlie seems like a lovely boy, where did you meet him?" And then says, "He's very different to your other friends. You seem much more like yourself around him." Nick responds, "Do I?" Like this is a surprise to him, and smiles to himself when his mother confirms it. After a day at Charlie's house, when Char holds Nick's hand to teach him to drum, later when Charlie falls asleep during the movie, Nick reaches out his hand, wanting to take Charlie's, and we see sparks. But Nick doesn't do it. When he leaves, they hug, a long embrace. This sparks his Googling research phase, "Am I gay?" The results of his quiz come out at 62% homosexual. You're definitely at least a little bit gay. And he sheds a tear at that. He is experiencing a little of that fear and confusion that often characterises the queer experience. But Nick's journey of self-discovery isn't straightforward, as these things never are. But his stumbling blocks are more about his own doubts, and then affirming who he is to himself more than anything external. His simple realisations, like at the party, he realises he'd rather hang out with Charlie than his year 11 friends. And he doesn't keep this to himself. He freely expresses to Harry that he doesn't like him and tells Charlie he'd rather hang out with him. He's grabbed Charlie's hand at this point and isn't really thinking about it when he leads Charlie somewhere else, still holding that hand. This leads to an earnest conversation where Charlie gets the courage to probe and eventually asks, nervously, if Nick would kiss him. It's a brilliant scene that is a perfect recreation of the moment from the comics. A moment of tension that gets wound tighter as Charlie extends a finger to touch his, as the spark animations kick in, even as they kiss, as you are unsure of whether Nick enjoyed it. But he grabs Charlie's hand and they lean in and kiss again, that tension released. But this story has a habit of turning things back up, so when Charlie asks him if he's okay, before Nick can answer, they're interrupted, and Nick leaves abruptly. Charlie, thinking he's ruined everything, has called his dad, and when his dad asks him if he's okay, he breaks down, and we break down with him. We know that Nick came back for him, but he doesn't. So while we're sure at this point that Nick enjoyed that kiss, Charlie doesn't know. This really is a journey of internal discovery and figuring out who you are, more so than it is about negotiating an often hostile world as an LGBTQI person. The story is the emotion, and writing it with Nick and Charlie is what makes this series so adorably beautiful. The next morning, Nick is on Charlie's doorstep in the soaking rain. Charlie apologises for kissing him, and Nick just kisses him again. Then Nick gets quiet and emotional. He says he's having a full-on gay crisis, that he wanted to kiss Charlie but he's just so confused, and that he needs time to figure it out.
I'm just so sorry I ran away last night. I was just freaking out because I was confused and surprised and, like, honestly, I'm having a proper full-on gay crisis.
Like the webcomic, at the start of this series, Charlie is seeing someone, a guy called Ben, played by Sebastian Croft, who meets up with Charlie for secret make-out sessions. But when Charlie finds out Ben has a girlfriend and is basically using him, he doesn't want to see Ben anymore. And it is really through Charlie's interactions with Ben that we see the positive effect that Nick and his feelings for Charlie have on Charlie himself. But Ben is meant as a contrast to Nick, someone who is clearly queer but scared of it, unwilling to go on the journey that Nick is going through, unwilling to change and upset his social status quo. And it results in hostility to Charlie, especially after Charlie rejects him. This results in a sexual assault that Nick saves him from. At the cinema, in a scene that isn't in the webcomic, Ben confronts Charlie about Nick, and when Charlie denies dating Nick, Ben basically says, as if anyone would ever want to go out with someone as desperate as you. But it's abundantly clear that Ben wants to, but he doesn't have an ounce of the courage that Charlie has, or that Nick is mustering. So he lashes out instead against that which he desires. Fighting against his authentic self is making him angry. And at the sports carnival, in the major scenes that aren't in the comics, when Ben talks shit about Charlie, Charlie beats him in the race and basically tells Ben he's a pathetic coward and that he doesn't get to say anything to him anymore. It's interesting to see how Ben and Nick deal with the same situation. Ben is two different people, the person he is with Charlie when alone and the person he is with Charlie when there are other people around. When other people are around, he won't even acknowledge Charlie's existence. Contrast this with Nick, and Nick wants to be around Charlie as much as possible. He wants more time with him. He doesn't care if other people see them together and doesn't give a shit what other people think about him for hanging out with Charlie. And this is before they've even kissed, while he's still figuring out how he feels. After, that just grows. He says Charlie is his favourite person. Spending time with Charlie is helping Nick discover and express his authentic self. While fear of change and everything it could ruin is a major factor in Tao's attitude, it's the substantial fear that drives Ben's animosity and the major issue Nick has about embracing his relationship with Charlie and letting other people know. He articulates this to Imogen when he says, "Do you ever feel like you're only doing everything just because everyone else is, and you're scared to change and do something that might confuse or surprise people? Your real personality has been like buried inside you for a really long time. I guess that's how I've been feeling recently." Charlie is an agent of change. He's not content with just letting things be. He needs to exert control where he can. Something that anyone who's read the webcomic knows will become a major theme in later seasons. But we see aspects of that here too, when Charlie asks his gay teacher, "How do you stop liking a straight boy?" The teacher says, "When I was a teenager, you basically just repressed it." And Charlie replies, "That doesn't seem particularly healthy." He wants something he can actually do about it. He wants to be able to exert control over this feeling, not have it control him. And Charlie wants things to change. Despite the bullying he suffered last year, he's optimistic that things will get better, and Nick is fueling that optimism. Charlie crushing on Nick affects them all because as Charlie changes, it affects the group dynamic and forces change in that group. Tao, on the other hand, is the opposite. He wants everything to stay the same. Tao fears change because he only sees how it could be worse. He makes Elle promise that whatever happens, they'll always prioritise their friendship, trying to freeze the moment, but limiting what it could possibly become. What he doesn't see is that change means everything could be better. Tao wants Elle back with them, but she's clearly better off and happier at the all-girls school. For her part, Elle realises that she has to change too, that being a wallflower won't make her happy, that she needs friends in her new school. Ultimately though, Charlie sees his role as an agent of change as a negative, more an agent of chaos. After Nick has gotten in a fight with Harry over Charlie, he says to his sister, "Maybe I do just ruin people's lives," claiming that it's his fault. His sister offers a bit of perspective, saying, "I wasn't there, but I'm certain it was Harry's fault, not yours." At the carnival, in the biggest departure from the comic, in the middle of the rugby match, when Nick sees Charlie, he leaves the field, takes Charlie's hand and walks off with him. It's his grand gesture, his "I don't want to lose this thing we have" moment. Because Nick is far enough on his journey to realise that his feelings for Charlie are real and they're not going away, and Charlie is important to him. And there are murmurs amongst the students, smiles amongst Charlie's friends, and Imogen, who realises what Nick meant when he said might confuse and surprise people. Mostly though, for this season and the internal journey that it has focused on, the reactions of those around them are irrelevant, so much so that we get no indication of the impact of that gesture at the school. There is no further scene at the school with other students. Nick makes it clear that he does not see Charlie coming into his life as a negative. He tells him, "I need you to know that my life is way better because I met you." Charlie replies, "You don't have to say that." And Nick replies again, "I do, and I'll keep on saying it until you believe me." Tara earlier articulates the issues that Nick initially fears, after she has experienced it when her and Darcy announced they were a couple. Being out is hard. A lot of people will see you in a different way, and it is a lot to deal with. But she also highlights the benefits. When Nick says that Tara and Darcy are kind of the first he's told about him and Charlie, Tara asks, "Does it feel good to have told someone?" And Nick replies, "Yeah, it really does." And that highlights the main theme here, that fear of change may prevent you from getting hurt, but it also prevents you from being your authentic self. Everything else is a facade, a lie that you tell yourself and maintain for others. But being your authentic self is ultimately the path to true happiness. The season finishes with their date at the beach. In what I think is the only real misstep in the season, Nick says, "What if I came out?" And Charlie replies, "Do you really want to?" And I'm like, you left the rugby field in front of most of the school, grabbed this boy's hand and walked away with him. I think you've pretty much come out. Anyway, Nick decides he's ready to tell people, and they say they are boyfriends. It finishes with Nick telling his mum and them ready to be more open about their relationship. Nick has gone on this journey of discovering who he really is and becoming his more authentic self because Charlie, this agent of change, got dropped in his lap. And I can't wait to see the impact in season 2. Thanks for watching. If you like what I do, please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to be notified whenever I upload a new video. Or consider supporting the channel through our Patreon. If you think I missed anything or have any comments, put them in the comments below, and I'll see you next video.